What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in today's video, I'm going to be diving into my Week 1 quarterback start sits. If you guys missed it, I went through my running backs and wide receivers over the last 2 days. I'll also be talking about the tight end position today also, but that's for a separate video. I'm not just going to talk about, a few quarterbacks here and there who I think are starts or sits. I'm going to be diving into every single Week 1 matchup, so all 16 games, talking about every starting quarterback and listing them as either a start, fringe option, or a sit. Starts are the players I feel very confident with in my lineup. I'd feel good plugging these guys in to be my QB1. The fringe options, I think they're startable. I wouldn't love it, but I think they're decent options in your lineup. And then sits, pretty self-explanatory. If you're a sit in these rankings or in this video, these are just guys that I do not want to be sniffing my lineup. I think the quarterback position is very interesting this year. I think there's a lot of depth, so I do think there are a lot of really solid starting options. And let's just jump right into it. So we're going to start off with the Thursday night game. We have the Lions taking on the Chiefs. And I actually did go back and forth with Jared Goff between a start and a fringe option. I do think this is a decent matchup for Jared Goff. This is probably going to be one of the more higher scoring games of the week, but I ended up settling for a fringe option here. I don't love the weapons he has early on in the season. With Jameson Williams suspended, behind Amon-Ra, his two top weapons are probably rookies in Jahmyr Gibbs and Sam Laporta. He's also not going to give you a ton on the ground. He's very limited as a rusher, so he's kind of, just locked into his passing work in terms of his fantasy production. So he's going to be a fringe option. If you're starting him, I don't think it's terrible, but he's not someone I'm super pumped to throw into my starting lineup. On the other side, if you have Patrick Mahomes, you're obviously going to be firing him up as a very strong start in your lineups. Moving over to the Sunday slate of games, we have the Panthers taking on the Falcons. Two young quarterbacks here, Bryce Young, Desmond Ridder. These are guys that I'm not interested in starting. Personally, I don't think these guys are going to be super fantasy relevant here in 2023. Maybe I'm wrong, but especially in week 1, would not be interested in playing these guys in your one quarterback leagues. Then moving over to the Texans taking on the Ravens, a pretty clear sit and then a pretty clear start. CJ Stroud, not interested in him here in week 1. On the other side with the Ravens, I have Lamar Jackson as a top 4 quarterback. I think he belongs in that tier with Mahomes, Josh Allen, and Jalen Hurts, so he is going to be a very strong start for me. Very interested in taking a look at this Ravens offense this week. I think they're going to be more pass heavy. I don't really know if this is the matchup that's going to bring that out, just because I think they're probably going to be able to shred the Texans on the ground, but definitely excited to see Lamar Jackson in this new Todd Monken offense. The next game, we have the Bengals taking on the Browns, and I have both of these quarterbacks listed as a start. Joe Burrow probably locked in every single week. If you drafted him as the QB 5, 6, 7, he's going to be locked in as a start every single week. On the other side with the Browns, I'm also very interested in seeing what this Browns offense looks like. I'm excited for a guy like Elijah Moore. I think he's going to have a nice season. I've been very high on Amari Cooper. Does Nick Chubb get involved as a pass catcher? A lot of these questions for the Browns is going to revolve around how well Deshaun Watson plays. So we're going to get to see that here in week 1. I do think, though, Deshaun Watson was picked as QB8, QB9. So if you drafted him, I think you should feel comfortable firing him up. It's possible he struggles like last year, but I think it's also possible he bounces back to his pre-suspension, pre-sitting out the season form. And if he does bounce back, he's going to be a great option for fantasy. So he will be a start for me. Then we have the Jaguars taking on the Colts. I think Trevor Lawrence is a very strong mid-tier QB1. I think he's going to take another step forward here in year 3. I feel like he could be on that Joe Burrow trajectory, just a year behind Joe Burrow. I do think he takes a leap here. Also has a true wide receiver 1 with Calvin Ridley. On the other side with the Colts, I'm very high on Anthony Richardson this year for fantasy. I think he's a really strong pick, and I do think he's someone that you can throw into your lineup throughout the season. I just have him as a fringe option here in week 1. He's making his NFL debut. I'm guessing this is going to be a season where he kind of gets more comfortable, builds throughout the season. So here in week 1, he's going to be a fringe play. If you have another, solid fringe QB1 option, I think they could be a nice option here in week 1. But I think long-term, Richardson should be solid. I just kind of rather wait and see it first. But if you, have to start him, I get it. And I think his rushing upside should be very strong this season. Moving over to the Buccaneers taking on the Vikings. For the Bucs here, even though the weapons are solid with Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, no shot we're starting Baker Mayfield here in week 1. Then for the Vikings, I believe the Vikings are top 5 in implied points for this game, according to Vegas. So I like Kirk Cousins as a solid start here. He's just consistently like a back-end QB1 for fantasy. I think he's a nice option here. Obviously, he has arguably the best wide receiver in the NFL with Justin Jefferson. Will be interesting to see what kind of playing time Jordan Addison gets, but I think he's a nice pick here in this game to start in your lineup. Then we have the Titans taking on the Saints. Not a super pretty matchup here at the quarterback position. Going to be sitting both Ryan Tannehill and Derek Carr. Don't think I need a ton of reasoning here. Just two guys that I'm not overly high on for fantasy. I think potentially throughout the season, these dudes could become streaming options. Like prior to last year, Tannehill had actually been a pretty solid fantasy quarterback with the Titans, but week 1, there's a lot of top options. Just not going to be interested in him here. And then for Derek Carr, has some decent weapons. Chris Olave, we'll see what he gets out of Michael Thomas. But, same thing with Tannehill, week 1. Just should not be starting these players in your one quarterback leagues. Next up, we have the 49ers taking on the Steelers. For the 49ers here, I actually think Brock Purdy is being a little bit slept on in terms of his fantasy value this season. When he was the starter last year, he was putting up very solid QB1 production. He obviously has a very strong supporting cast with Debo, Brandon Ayuk, Christian McCaffrey, George Kittle. So I think he's a nice fringe option here. And as injuries start to pop up, bye weeks, I do think he could be viewed as like a weekly top 12, maybe even like top 10 fantasy quarterback moving forward. On the other side for the Steelers, I think Kenny Pickett is someone who could kind of emerge as a decent fantasy option. I think he can, build on his rookie season. Decent weapons with Deontay Johnson, George Pickens heading into year 2, Pat Freiermuth. But, week 1, a lot of quality options out there. Not someone I'd want to be starting here for fantasy. Moving over to the Cardinals taking on the Commanders. Pretty gross quarterback matchup here for the Cardinals. At the time that I'm recording this, we still do not know who their starter is going to be. They released Colt McCoy, so it's either going to be Clayton Tune or Joshua Dobbs. We're just fading this quarterback room. Zero interest for fantasy. I feel like it would even be a stretch to start one of these dudes in like a super flex league. Just not a great spot here for the Cardinals. And then for Sam Howell with the Commanders, I think Sam Howell's interesting. I think maybe he becomes relevant for fantasy, but in week 1, definitely not someone that we should be looking at here. We have the Packers taking on the Bears. And for the Packers, I know there are a lot of big-time Jordan Love supporters out there. It's possible he becomes a solid quarterback, but here in week 1, just not something I want to bet on. On the other side with Justin Fields, I'm very high on Fields heading into this season. He's my quarterback 5. Love the rushing upside. He has a true wide receiver 1 in DJ Moore. In my opinion, he's an every week fantasy football starter. In the next matchup, we have the Raiders taking on the Broncos. Not super interested in either of these guys here in week 1. Jimmy G, going from the 49ers here to the Raiders. He does have Devontae Adams, but I'm not overly high in this offense. He's never really been a great fantasy option, so someone who will be a sit for me. On the other side with Russell Wilson, Russ this season is very tough to evaluate. He's kind of like in a Deshaun Watson situation, but even more extreme, where it's like if he bounces back, he's going to end up being a value, but it's possible he's just kind of cooked at this point and is just going to struggle again. I do think, I'm leaning more towards him bouncing back, but with how strong the quarterback position is, the depth options, like you could have guys like Daniel Jones, Geno Smith, Aaron Rodgers, Kirk Cousins. Those guys could be like the number 2 quarterback on your roster. In week 1, I would not want to be starting Russell Wilson. If he goes out, lights it up, then it's like, okay, we can be back in on him. But in week 1, I would just hope there's a better option out there. Then we have the Dolphins taking on the Chargers. This is probably going to be one of the highest scoring games of the week, which leads me to liking both of these guys for fantasy. I do think Tua really struggled last season in the matchup against the Chargers, but it's a fresh season. I'm sure Mike McDaniel is going to have something, different cooked up here for Tua. He obviously has great weapons with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, so I like Tua here. And then for me, Justin Herbert's going to be an every week start. He is coming off of a tough 2022 season, but I think a lot of that was due to his personal rib injuries and then also the injuries to guys like Keenan Allen and Mike Williams. I'm expecting a big bounce back this year out of Justin Herbert. Next, we have the Eagles taking on the Patriots. I think we have a pretty clear start and a pretty clear sit. Jalen Hurts consistently drafted as a top 3 quarterback. He is locked into your lineup. On the other side, Mac Jones, never been a super strong fantasy option. The weapons aren't great here with the Patriots. and you have a tough matchup going up against this Eagles defense, so definitely going to be sitting Mac Jones. Then we're going to have the Rams taking on the Seahawks. For the Rams, if Cooper Kupp is out, this could be a really gross game. Even if Cooper Kupp is healthy, I still think we're sitting Matthew Stafford. Just want to see what this Rams offense looks like. Stafford dealt with a lot of injuries last season. We'll see if he's still the same guy. So definitely going to be a sit for Stafford. On the other side with the Seahawks, very high on Geno heading into this season. You look at his weapons, really strong group, especially at the wide receiver position. DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, JSN. You also have decent running backs there with Kenneth Walker, Zach Charbonnet, who could be involved as a pass catcher. So I really like Geno here as a start and just throughout the entire 2023 season. On Sunday Night Football, we have the Cowboys taking on the Giants, and two more of these guys who are just, being drafted as fringe QB1s, but I think these are nice plays here in Week 1. Dak Prescott, has a new addition in the weapons with Brandon Cooks coming in. We know CeeDee Lamb is a stud, Michael Gallup, a second year removed from that ACL tear. I think Dak bounces back, and I like him as a start here in Week 1. I really like Daniel Jones. After that group of Trevor Lawrence and Deshaun Watson, and the top 7 guys ahead of those, Daniel Jones is my next best guy. I have him leading that large tier with guys like Dak, Rodgers, Kirk, Geno Smith, Anthony Richardson, all those players. So I really am in on Daniel Jones this season. I think they've made some decent upgrades on offense, bringing in Darren Waller. Wide receivers are still a little rough, but they've made some additions there also. I think Daniel Jones is going to have a big season here in 2023, and I do like him as a start. And then moving into the final game of the week, Monday Night Football, Bills taking on the Jets. If you drafted Josh Allen, you're 100% firing him up as a start. And then for the Jets here, I do think Aaron Rodgers is someone who's going to be a locked-in start at some points in this season. Just Week 1, tough matchup against the Bills. Also going to be his first game with the Jets. They're probably going to, build on their chemistry throughout the season. We saw it when Tom Brady went to the Buccaneers. They struggled early on, kind of figured it out later on in the season. I think a similar thing could happen here. If Aaron Rodgers is your starting quarterback, it's definitely possible you have a second option. If that second option is Kirk, Geno, Daniel Jones, I would pivot to that second option. But if Aaron Rodgers is your only quarterback, I wouldn't panic. I think he's a solid fringe option. Just think we should temper expectations a little bit here in his first week with the Jets. But that is going to wrap it up for all 16 Week 1 matchups. If you guys enjoyed the video, do me a huge favor, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. Go check out my other start-sit videos, and you can drop your start-sit questions down below in the comments. All I ask is that if you guys can give me the scoring setting, it just helps me, give you guys the best answer. But that is going to wrap it up for this one. Thank you all again for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.